Braylee Summers nearly dropped her tray of lemonade when Elias Rainer stepped out of the black vintage convertible and onto the cracked pavement of her old neighborhood's annual reunion block party. He looked wildly out of place, tailored navy suit, Italian loafers, and sunglasses that probably cost more than her rent. The car alone turned heads, but it wasn't just the car or the clothes that made her heart hiccup. It was him, Elias Rainer, the boy she used to know. The one who lived down the street and moved away after his junior year. The one she used to argue with over treehouse space and secretly crush on until he vanished without a word. She blinked twice, gripping the tray tighter. "You have got to be kidding me, Braylee." A familiar voice called from behind the grill, "You mind bringing that tray over to the drinks table?" Her feet didn't move, because Elias was walking right toward her. He stopped just short of bumping into her, pushing his sunglasses up to rest on his head. "Braylee Summers," he said, his smile crooked like it always was when he'd tease her as a kid. "Didn't think I'd find you here." Her eyes narrowed. "Why are you here?" He laughed. "Nice to see you too." She handed the tray off to a passing teen and crossed her arms. "You're not from here anymore." "Still got the same scar on my knee from that skate ramp we built back in '04. Pretty sure that qualifies me." She didn't smile. "You didn't answer the question." He shoved his hands into his pockets. "I was in town for business. Drove by the old street, saw the balloons, figured I'd stop." "Just like that?" she asked, not buying it. "Just like that," he said, eyes scanning the crowd forming around tables with paper plates, hot dogs, and folding chairs. "Didn't expect it'd still look the exact same." "It's not a museum," she said. "People just never had a reason to change it." He glanced back at her, something softer in his expression now. "You look different. You look expensive." That made him laugh again, louder this time. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It wasn't." He leaned in a little. "You always this charming, or just for me?" Braylee turned on her heel. "Still annoying, I see." But he followed her, because of course he did. She wove through the tables to the food tent, pretending not to notice him walking beside her, nodding politely to Mrs. Kessler from across the street and waving to her old science teacher. She could feel Elias watching her. "You live here still?" he asked. "Yeah, I moved back after college. Dad passed a few years ago. Mom needed help." She didn't know him that answer, but it came out anyway. He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." She paused, hesitating before looking up at him. "Thanks." They reached the drinks table, and she busied herself opening lemonade bottles with a bottle opener, trying to ignore how tall he'd gotten, how broad his shoulders were, how his hair was still that ridiculous mess of dark waves that somehow looked like it belonged on a magazine cover now. "How long are you in town?" she asked without looking at him. "Just until Monday, so 2 days. Unless I find a reason to stay." She glanced at him then, catching the way he was looking at her. It made her stomach flip. She hated that it did. "Don't waste your time," she said. "Nothing here's changed." "Maybe that's what I'm hoping for," he replied. She grabbed a lemonade and took a long sip, needing the distraction. People were starting to gather for the fire pit, kids running wild with glow sticks, and someone turned on music from an old boombox. "Braylee," her best friend Jessa called, jogging over. "You're not gonna believe who just showed up. Oh, you're talking to him." Jessa gave Elias a once-over, eyes wide. "Wow, you clean up well." "Thanks," Elias said, flashing her that grin. Braylee rolled her eyes. "He's leaving Monday." Jessa's brows lifted. "That's a shame." "Okay," Braylee said, grabbing Jessa by the elbow. "We're going to help with dessert. Enjoy the party, Elias." As they walked off, Jessa leaned in. "You're acting weird." "I'm fine. You're lying." Braylee stopped behind the dessert table, arms crossed. He left without saying goodbye, then shows up 10 years later with a car that looks like it should be in a Bond film and acts like we're old friends. "I'm allowed to be weird." Jessa tilted her head. "You still care?" "No, I don't. Liar." Braylee shoved a plate of cookies at her. "Just make yourself useful." But even as she laughed it off, she couldn't shake the heat that had blossomed in her chest when he looked at her. And she definitely couldn't stop thinking about the way his voice had softened when he said her name. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People danced to old songs, the kids roasted marshmallows, and Braylee tried to avoid Elias like it was her full-time job. But every time she turned around, he was somewhere nearby talking to her old neighbors, helping carry chairs, tossing a football with the younger kids like he belonged again. He hadn't belonged here in a long time. Later, just before she was about to leave, she walked around the side of her mom's house to grab her bag. She hadn't expected to find Elias leaning against her mom's porch railing, looking up at the stars like he'd never seen them before. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Hey, you still here?" she asked, arms crossed. "I like the quiet," she hesitated. "Didn't peg you as a stars guy." "I'm not," he said. "But this feels like the only real thing I've seen in months." She walked up the steps beside him, leaning on the other railing. "Big city not exciting enough for you," he glanced at her. "Exciting, sure, but it's not. This," she looked down at his shoes, then back up at him. "You've changed," he shrugged. "So have you." They stood in silence for a few seconds before he said, "I miss this place." "You didn't miss me," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I did, Braylee." She didn't have a response for that, not one that made sense. "I thought about writing, calling. But I didn't know what to say after I left." "You could have said anything," she said. "Literally anything." "I regret it." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "It's a little late now." "Maybe," he said, "but I'd still like to make it up to you," she scoffed. "With what?" "A ride in your six-figure car," he grinned. "No, I was thinking dinner," she raised a brow. "Where?" "Wherever you want," she hesitated. Every part of her told her this was a bad idea, that people like Elias didn't stay, that they didn't fall for girls like her. But there was something in his voice, calm, steady, real, that made her chest ache. "Fine," she said. "One dinner." He smiled like he'd just won the lottery. "Tomorrow," she added, walking past him toward her car. "You're paying." "Wouldn't dream of anything else." The next evening, Braylee stood in front of the mirror in her mother's cramped upstairs bathroom, tugging at the zipper of a black jumpsuit she hadn't worn in over a year. She hadn't planned to agree to dinner. She hadn't even planned to talk to Elias for more than 5 minutes. But somehow, here she was, curling her hair with one hand while checking her phone for the time with the other. He was late. She wasn't sure if that annoyed her or gave her a chance to talk herself out of going altogether. From downstairs came the sound of her mother's door creaking open. "Bray," her mother called. "There's a very shiny car in the driveway." Braylee pressed her lips together. "Yeah, I know, you expecting someone, unfortunately." "Well, he's out there now." "Wearing a suit like he's headed to a wedding." Braylee didn't answer. Instead, she gave herself one last look in the mirror and blew out a breath. "Okay, just dinner." She grabbed her purse, headed down the stairs, and opened the front door. Elias stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his jacket slung casually over one shoulder and a watch that caught the sunlight peeking from beneath his sleeve. His dress shirt was the color of black coffee and tucked into slacks that probably had a name more specific than just slacks. He looked like he belonged at the opening of an art gallery in Manhattan, not waiting on a porch in a town that didn't even have a movie theater anymore. "You're late," she said as she descended the steps. "I had to circle the block 3 times, he replied. "Your neighbor flagged me down thinking I was lost, asked if I was looking for the church." She gave him a dry look. "You don't exactly blend in." "I'm learning that." He opened the passenger door of the car with a flourish. "Shall we?" She hesitated for a second before sliding in. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something citrusy she couldn't place. Elias walked around and got in beside her, adjusting the radio with the ease of someone who never had to fiddle with old knobs or broken aux cords. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see. Is it a chain restaurant?" "Do I look like a chain restaurant kind of guy?" "Yes." He laughed under his breath and pulled onto the road. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. The sun was beginning to set, casting everything in a soft orange light that turned the fields outside the town into something almost cinematic. Braylee kept her hands folded in her lap and tried not to fidget. "You still paint?" Elias asked. She turned her head slightly. "How do you remember that? You used to set up in the backyard with your easel and yell at anyone who walked too close." "That sounds about right, so," he asked. "I don't have time for it anymore." "Shame," he said, eyes on the road. "You were good." She didn't respond. It had been years since she'd touched a paintbrush. Between her job at the high school's front office and helping her mother balance bills, her days ended with microwaved leftovers and the nightly news, not canvases and turpentine. They turned off the main road and onto a gravel path that wound through a grove of trees Braylee didn't recognize. "Where are we?" "Almost there." She narrowed her eyes. "If you're taking me to some rich people's vineyard for an authentic experience, I'm getting out." "Relax," he said, pulling up to a small stone cottage tucked behind a clearing. Lights glowed warmly through the front windows and soft music drifted from inside. A wooden sign above the door read, "Marlowe's." "I've never heard of this place," she said. "You wouldn't," he replied, stepping out and coming around to open her door. "It's reservation only, no website. They only serve 6 tables a night," she blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope," he offered her his arm. "Come on." Inside, the restaurant looked nothing like she expected. There were no gaudy chandeliers or white tablecloths. Instead, the space smelled like rosemary and cedar, with candles flickering on reclaimed wood tables and a single violinist playing in the corner. A woman in a navy apron greeted them by name and led them to a table near the fireplace. "Have you brought other women here?" Braylee asked as they sat. Elias looked amused, not from Chestnut Street. She narrowed her eyes. "That's not a no." He leaned back in his chair. "I don't usually bring anyone anywhere. I'm not great at that whole, consistent effort thing." Shocking. The server approached with 2 menus, but Elias waved them off. "We'll do the chef's tasting," he said. Braylee raised a brow. "Are you always this controlling?" "Only when I know what's good." The first course arrived minutes later, something with figs, goat cheese, and toasted almonds. She didn't recognize half of it, but it tasted like the kind of food people wrote about in magazines. She glanced around the restaurant. "How do you even find a place like this?" "An old client told me about it," he said. "Used to come out here to get away from the city." "And you needed to get away from the city too." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he traced the rim of his water glass with one finger. "I needed to get away from a lot of things." She watched him carefully. "Like what?" He met her gaze. "Noise, expectations, people who only care about what they can get from you." "Sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted. "But when you're surrounded by people all the time and still feel like no one really sees you, being alone starts to feel safe." She didn't expect that answer. And she definitely didn't expect the way it made something tug in her chest. "What do you do exactly?" she asked. "I'm a venture strategist." "That sounds made up," he grinned. "It basically means I invest in things, tech startups, real estate, media companies. I help them grow, then sell or scale, so you're rich." He didn't confirm or deny it, just tilted his head and said, "I'm comfortable." The second course arrived, and as they ate, the conversation shifted. They talked about the music they liked now, the places they'd visited, the books they never finished. She told him about the time the school mascot costume caught fire during a homecoming game. He told her about getting stranded in Iceland during a snowstorm and having to hitchhike with a group of German tourists who didn't speak English. She laughed harder than she had in months. After dessert, some kind of lavender panna cotta that tasted like it had been made by angels, he walked her back to the car. The night air was cooler now, the stars overhead clearer than she'd seen them in weeks. He opened the passenger door, but she didn't get in right away. "That was unexpected," she said. "In a good way." She nodded slowly. "In a confusing way." He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "I meant what I said yesterday, Bray. I do regret leaving the way I did. I was a kid who didn't know how to say goodbye. I thought disappearing would be easier. It wasn't. I know that now." She looked up at him, the words catching in her throat. "Why are you really here, Elias?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Because I remembered something that used to make me feel like myself. And I wanted to see if it still existed." Her chest tightened. "Did you find it?" she asked. His eyes didn't leave hers. "I think I'm starting to." She got in the car without another word, heart thrumming louder than the engine. Braylee didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, her fingers twisting into the hem of the oversized t-shirt she wore to bed. the taste of lavender still lingering on her tongue and Elias's words looping in her head like a record stuck in a groove. By morning, her thoughts were no less tangled. She poured herself a cup of black coffee, ignoring her mother's knowing glance from across the kitchen. Mrs. Summers said nothing, just raised a brow and went back to her crossword. Braylee grabbed her keys. She needed to paint. There was still a dusty easel in the garage, buried behind boxes of old Christmas lights and her father's rusted tool chest. She hadn't touched it in years, but her hands found it like muscle memory. By mid-morning, she had it propped in the backyard, a fresh canvas clipped into place, and a palette of half-dried oils stirred back to life with a few drops of linseed. She didn't know what she was painting. She just painted, colors bled together, blues and golds, a sky that didn't exist. A street that never curved that way. A man's silhouette standing at the edge of it, watching a house with the lights still on, when Elias called later that afternoon, because of course she let it ring until the voicemail picked up. She needed space, but space was short-lived. The next morning, as she stepped out of the grocery store, arms full of bags, she spotted him leaning against the hood of his car parked just outside the bakery across the street. He had no right to look that calm or that patient. She crossed toward him with her jaw set. "Are you stalking me now?" she asked. "I was picking up croissants," he said, holding up a white paper bag. "You just happened to materialize." She narrowed her eyes but didn't argue. "I left you alone yesterday," he said. "I figured I earned 5 minutes." She exhaled and set her groceries in the passenger seat of her car. "You have 3. "I want to show you something. I'm not getting in that car again," she said. "It's not the car, it's a place." She hesitated, then crossed her arms. "If this is a ploy to get me alone again, you can drive. I'll give directions." She studied him. His tone was different, no teasing, no half grins, just quiet certainty. "Fine. But if you're lying, I'm turning around." 20 minutes later, they pulled off the county road and into a gravel lot beside a weathered red barn. The fields beyond it rolled for acres, golden and open under the morning light. She stepped out and looked around. "What is this?" "It's for sale," he said, walking toward the barn doors. "I've been eyeing it for months." "For what?" "A winery, a tech startup with goats." He tugged open the doors. Inside was empty space, sunlight streaming through high windows, wooden beams exposed, the scent of dust and old hay in the air. "I want to build an arts and innovation center," he said. "A space for workshops, studios, events. I've been looking for the right town to put it in." She blinked. "You want to put that here?" "They need it here," he said. "And I need something that feels like it matters." She walked slowly through the barn, her fingers grazing the edge of an old stall. "You don't strike me as the philanthropic type." "I wasn't," he said. "Until I realized money doesn't do much if no one benefits from it but you." She turned toward him. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I'm not sure I'd have thought to do it here if I hadn't seen you again. You reminded me what real looks like." She looked away quickly. "You don't even know me anymore." "I'd like to," he said carefully. "If you'd let me." She swallowed hard. "It's not that simple." "I'm not asking for simple." They stood in silence inside the barn while the wind stirred outside, rustling the grass. Finally, she spoke. "What makes you think this town would even want something like this?" "Because I've talked to people," he said. "Your neighbor, the principal at the high school, the woman who runs the community theater. They all said the same thing: they want growth, but they don't want to lose the soul of the town. And you think this place can balance both?" "I think it needs someone who understands both sides." She looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't pitching her, he wasn't performing. He was just standing there, waiting. "I'd want to be involved," she said finally. His face lit up. She raised a hand. "I'm serious. If this happens here, it needs to be ours." "Not some big city man's charity project," agreed. "And if you disappear again, I'll throw every can of paint I own at your car," he grinned. "That's fair." They drove back to town in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, charged. That night, Elias showed up at her door with a bottle of wine and a folder full of sketches for the barn. They spread them out on her kitchen table, talking late into the evening about renovation permits, community outreach, and potential partnerships with local artists. Braylee hadn't felt this alive in years. But just when she thought just maybe this new chapter was unfolding the way it was supposed to, the past came knocking. It was almost midnight when her mother walked into the kitchen with a letter in her hand. "This was in the mailbox," she said, handing it to Braylee. "Postmarked 2 weeks ago." Braylee took it and frowned at the unfamiliar handwriting on the envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper with neat cursive. "Dear Miss Summers, I hope this letter reaches you in time. I was your father's legal counsel before he passed, and I've recently discovered documentation he left behind that affects you directly. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Graham Delaney and Crosswell, Estate Management." Braylee stared at the letter, her heart pounding. "What is it?" Elias asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I think my dad left something behind, something I never knew about." She looked up at him, pulse racing. And for the first time, Elias Rainer wasn't the biggest mystery in her life. Braylee stood in the doorway of Delaney and Crosswell, clutching the strap of her purse and trying to ignore the flutter of unease in her stomach. The office smelled like old books and polished wood, the kind of place where secrets were filed away in leather folders and handed over with a quiet nod. A tall man with a salt and pepper beard stepped from behind a glass-paned door and extended his hand. "Miss Summers, I'm Graham Delaney." "Thank you for coming." "I wasn't sure I should," Braylee admitted as she followed him into a small conference room. "The letter, it didn't say much." "I understand," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Your father was a very private man. But before his passing, he entrusted me with some instructions. He asked that this only be brought to your attention if certain conditions were met." "What kind of conditions?" He opened a folder and slid a set of documents across the table. "He wanted to be sure you were staying. That you'd made the choice to build a life here, not out of obligation, but because you wanted to." Braylee's eyes scanned the paperwork. There were photos, blueprints, a deed. "This is the old Sinclair property," she said, recognizing the plot of land near the riverbank. "It's been abandoned for years." "Not abandoned," Delaney corrected. "Held in trust. Your father purchased it quietly before his illness progressed. He intended it to be yours when the time was right." She looked up. "But why?" Delaney leaned back in his chair. "He believed you had the ability to bring something back to this town, not just stay in it, revive it. He left funds for restoration, along with a letter." He handed her the envelope. Her name was written in her father's unmistakable handwriting, shaky but clear. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she stepped out into the sunlight a few minutes later, the envelope pinched between her fingers, the quiet weight of everything pressing in. When she turned the corner, she wasn't surprised to see Elias waiting beside her car. "I figured you'd come here," he said, nodding toward the building. "You following me again?" He shook his head. "No, but I saw the logo on the envelope yesterday. I put the rest together." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You were the only person who made this place feel like it wasn't collapsing on top of me. And now, suddenly, I'm holding a deed, and half the town thinks I'm about to change everything." "You're not alone in this," Elias said. "You know that, right?" "You say that now," she replied, opening her car door. He stepped forward, resting his hand on the frame. "You think I'd spend the last week helping you sketch out plans and talk to city council if I didn't mean to stay?" Her breath caught. "I don't know what you mean to do. You could leave tomorrow and I wouldn't be surprised." "That's fair," he said, "but it's not what I want." She looked down at the envelope again, then back at him. "I'm scared, Elias. I don't want to get this wrong. I don't want to waste what he left behind." "Then don't do it alone," he said quietly. "Let's build something that matters together." She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she reached up and pressed the envelope into his chest. "Read it with me." They sat on the hood of her car, legs stretched out, the letter unfolded between them. Her father's words were simple. He spoke of belief, of regret, of the life he had hoped she would find and the joy he hoped she'd make for herself. When she finished reading, Elias didn't speak. He just let the silence hold. Braylee folded the letter carefully, fingers trembling. "I think I know what I want to do," she said. He turned toward her. "Tell me." "I want to turn that property into something lasting. A place where people can come to create, to heal, to learn. I want to bring color back to this town." His eyes lit with something she hadn't seen before, not admiration, not interest, hope. "Then let's do it," he said. Over the next several weeks, everything changed. The barn renovation moved faster than expected. The foundation was leveled, the roof reinforced, and Braylee's designs workshops with glass walls, a studio built with natural light in mind, and an outdoor amphitheater became more than sketches on paper. People donated supplies. Volunteers showed up. Paint went on the walls in bursts of wild color and bold brushstrokes, and with each passing day, Braylee and Elias fell deeper into something that stopped pretending to be temporary. He brought her coffee every morning. She left notes in his truck with half-finished quotes and paint samples. They argued over tile patterns and lighting fixtures, but it always ended with laughter and some kind of wager, usually dinner. One evening, while she was on a ladder adjusting a sign that read "The Foundry," she heard his voice behind her. "You know," he said, "we never celebrated." "Celebrated what?" "Everything, the barn, the center, us." She climbed down, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You want to throw a party?" "I want to throw a gala," he said, pulling a velvet box from his coat pocket. "And I want you to be the guest of honor." She stared at the box, blinking. "What is that?" He opened it. Inside was a pendant shaped like a paintbrush, delicate and gleaming, with a sapphire set into the handle, hanging from a fine gold chain. "I commissioned it," Elias said. "From a local metalsmith. It's yours." Her fingers brushed the edge, stunned. "Why?" "Because you're the brush," he said. "You brought everything back to life." She didn't speak for a moment, then she stepped toward him, her voice low. "I've been waiting my whole life for someone to see me like that." He leaned in, every trace of distance between them gone. "Then let me keep seeing you." That night, the gala was held under the stars, with string lights wound through the newly planted trees and music echoing through the open fields. Guests wore handmade jewelry from local artists, their plates full of food grown within 10 miles. Braylee wore a crimson dress that fluttered in the breeze, her hair pinned back with wildflowers. Elias stood beside her in a midnight suit, his arm around her waist as the mayor gave a speech. When the applause faded and the music returned, Elias pulled her into the center of the floor. "You made this happen," he whispered. "So did you." As they danced, the crowd blurred. There was only the quiet rhythm of their steps and the peace that came with finally being home in purpose, in place in each other. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony of the newly finished studio, the town lights glowing in the distance, Braylee turned to him. "I can't believe it started with a reunion." Elias smiled, the wind tugging at his collar. "I can." "You were the only reason I came back." She leaned into him, her voice steady with certainty. "And you're the reason I stayed." He kissed her then, not in a rush or with hesitation, but with the kind of promise that didn't need words, because the reunion had ended. But everything else was just beginning. The first day the foundry officially opened, the line to get in wrapped around the block. Braylee stood just inside the main entrance beside a tall sculpture made entirely of salvaged metal and painted glass. She wore a sleek forest green wrap dress and boots speckled with old paint stains she hadn't had time to wash off. Her hair was pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, a few strands escaping as she moved through the space greeting guests, guiding them toward workshops, introducing artists she'd helped bring in from across the region. Every time she turned, Elias was there, never hovering, just close enough. He was in deep navy today, no tie, his sleeves rolled up as he helped the event coordinator wrangle sound equipment for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He looked comfortable, present, like this place wasn't just hers anymore. It was theirs. "You're staring," said Mallory, one of the ceramicists from the upstairs studio. She nudged Braylee with a knowing grin. "I'm observing," Braylee replied, cheeks warming. Mallory tilted her head. "You two built something real, not just the center." "That doesn't happen often." Braylee didn't answer. She didn't have to. She found Elias by the back exit, talking with a group of local business owners about a potential summer festival. When she stepped into the circle, he paused mid-sentence and reached for her hand without looking, fingers finding hers like it was second nature. "I was just telling them about the outdoor amphitheater," he said, eyes still on her. They're wondering if we can host community theater here, Braylee added. I think we can, if we adjust the lighting rig and expand the seating platform. I told them you'd say that, Elias said, turning back to the group. She's already 5 steps ahead. After the ceremony, when the crowds had thinned and the sky blushed with the first hints of dusk, they stood beside the large mural Braylee had painted on the side of the building, a sweeping depiction of the town's past and present, stitched together by a single golden thread. Elias touched the edge of the painted thread, his voice low. You know, this mural reminds me of you. How you hold everything together, even the parts that don't look like they should fit. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It still doesn't feel real that this all worked. It worked because you didn't let it fail. They stood there in the quiet for a long moment, watching as kids played tag between the benches and parents browsed the vendor tables with paper cups of cider and handmade scarves tucked under their arms. Then Elias turned toward her, expression unusually serious. I've been thinking about something, he said. About staying, she looked up. You're already staying. No, I mean really staying. No more boardrooms in Chicago, no more flying back for meetings I don't care about, I want to be here. Fully, her heart stuttered. You'd leave all of that? I'd trade every last share I own to wake up next to you and spend my days building something that isn't built on deadlines and profit margins. She blinked rapidly. You mean that? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim, velvet box, not the kind that held jewelry, but something longer. Braylee opened it slowly. Inside was a single antique paintbrush. The bristles were worn, the handle engraved with faint initials JS, her father's. I found it in the studio you're restoring, Elias said. It was tucked behind an old crate. I think he left it there on purpose. She touched the brush gently. He always said art lives longer than we do. That's what we're doing here, Elias said, living louder. Longer? The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Elias trying to make pancakes in her mother's kitchen. He was wearing one of her dad's old aprons, slightly too short, and looked entirely unbothered as batter dripped onto the stovetop. You're going to burn the house down, Braylee said, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. I already set off the smoke alarm once, he said cheerfully. Your mom took it surprisingly well. She's been waiting for someone to make me laugh like this again. He turned and kissed her forehead. Then I'm glad I came back. They ate breakfast on the porch. Her mother read the paper beside them, pretending not to listen as they planned a spring fundraiser for the center. The dog from next door trotted into the yard like he owned the place, and Elias tossed him a scrap of bacon without missing a beat. Later that week, as Braylee stood on the stage inside the Foundry's main gallery, addressing a crowd of students from the high school, she caught sight of Elias leaning against the far wall. He wasn't watching the event, he was watching her. After the students left, she walked over and looped her arms around his neck. You never look away, she murmured. I never will. 2 months after the opening, they hosted their first artist in residence. A muralist from Asheville who taught kids how to paint with their whole body's hands, feet, elbows. Elias helped install a kiln in the ceramics room. Braylee led her first public workshop in figure drawing. They danced at the summer solstice festival under lanterns made from recycled wine bottles strung across the trees. She painted a portrait of Elias that he refused to hang anywhere but in the entryway of their shared loft above the studio. And then, one rainy Friday in August, Elias asked her to marry him. He didn't do it at a fancy restaurant or during a gala or surrounded by fanfare. He did it in the studio, with paint on his hands, her head resting on his chest, and the sound of thunder rolling across the hills. I don't want a perfect life, he said. I want a full one, with you, with all the mess and color and beauty we can create. She answered him by pulling him down into a kiss that tasted like salt and rain and forever. They married that fall in the garden behind the Foundry. The ceremony was small, just friends, neighbors, and the handful of people who'd helped them build a dream from dust. Braylee wore a dress the color of morning sunlight. Elias wore a boutonniere made of dried lavender and copper wire. They wrote their own vows, no scripts, no pretense, just promises. After the ceremony, they danced barefoot on the grass, music floating from a live quartet on the porch. Her mother cried. The town mayor gave a toast that included 2 jokes about Elias's first failed attempt at assembling a bookshelf. When the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias led Braylee to the mural she'd painted. He'd added something small in the corner, an outline of a paintbrush and a compass intertwined. "It's us," he said. "Art and direction." She leaned her head against his, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We're home." And they were, in every way that mattered, forever.